The phone rang at 8:30 in the morning, disrupting my peaceful Saturday routine. When I saw the unknown number, I almost declined it, but something made me answer. A lawyer's voice informed me that my parents had filed a lawsuit demanding $180,000 from my savings account. My heart sank as memories flooded back of my mother, Linda's cruel words echoing through my childhood. "You were a mistake, Leah." But what they did not know was that their years of emotional abuse had only made me stronger. Before I dive into this story, I would love to know where you are watching from. Please hit that like button and subscribe if you want to hear more stories about standing up for yourself. Trust me, this journey gets intense. But the ending. Well, let me just say justice has a way of showing up when you least expect it. Growing up in suburban Ohio, I learned early that love in the Thompson household was not distributed equally. I was born in 1995, an unplanned pregnancy that my parents never let me forget. When my sister Jessica arrived 3 years later in 1998, everything changed. She became the golden child while I faded into the background like yesterday's newspaper. The differences were impossible to ignore. Jessica got the spacious upstairs bedroom painted in soft pink, with white furniture and a canopy bed that looked like something from a fairy tale. I was given the converted basement space with concrete walls and a single window that barely let in any natural light. When I asked why Jessica needed the bigger room, my mother Linda simply said, "She has more things, and frankly, you should be grateful to have your own space." Birthdays painted the starkest picture of their favoritism. Jessica's celebrations were elaborate affairs, with themed decorations, professional photography, and guest lists that stretched to 30 kids from her class. Her Sweet 16 party cost more than most people's cars complete with a DJ, catered food, and a chocolate fountain. My birthdays, however, were afterthoughts marked by grocery store sheet cakes, and maybe $5 tucked into a generic card. When I turned 16, they forgot entirely until Jessica reminded them 3 days later. Dinner times became daily reminders of my place in the family hierarchy. Jessica would request her favorite meals, and Linda would happily comply, preparing elaborate spreads of chicken parmesan or homemade lasagna. When it was my turn to eat, I got whatever leftovers remained, or a hastily prepared sandwich. If I dared to ask for something specific, Linda would sigh dramatically and say, "Leah, we cannot cater to everyone's demands. Just eat what is provided." The emotional neglect cut deeper than any physical punishment could have. When I brought home straight-A report cards semester after semester, my father Richard barely glanced up from his newspaper. "That is nice, sweetheart," he would mumble before turning to Jessica and praising her C- in algebra as if she had discovered the cure for cancer. "You are really improving, Princess. We are so proud of your effort." School events highlighted their indifference toward my achievements while amplifying their devotion to Jessica. I made the honor roll every semester throughout high school, participated in the debate team, and even won a regional science fair competition. My parents attended none of these events, claiming they were too busy with work or Jessica's activities. Yet they never missed a single one of Jessica's mediocre piano recitals or her participation trophies from recreational soccer leagues, where every player received an award simply for showing up. When college acceptance letters arrived, I had earned a full academic scholarship to Ohio State University for computer science. Instead of celebration, my achievement was met with cold practicality. "Do not expect us to pay for your dorm room or meal plan," Richard stated matter-of-factly. "That scholarship covers tuition, which is more than most kids get." Meanwhile, Jessica expressed interest in learning piano, and within a week, they had purchased a $5,000 baby grand piano and enrolled her in expensive private lessons with the best instructor in town. Throughout those painful years, I kept trying to earn their love and approval through service and sacrifice. I cleaned the house without being asked, hoping they would notice my efforts. I cooked elaborate birthday meals for Linda, spending my part-time job money on ingredients for her favorite recipes. But Jessica would simply pick up a bouquet from the grocery store florist, and suddenly, she was the thoughtful daughter while my hours of preparation went unacknowledged. I attempted to bond with Jessica by showing interest in her hobbies, hoping that shared activities might create opportunities for family togetherness. When she started playing piano, I asked if I could learn too, thinking we might practice together. Richard shot down the idea immediately. One musician in the family is expensive enough, Leah. Besides, Jessica has natural talent. Stop trying so hard to copy everything she does. That phrase became a recurring theme in their interactions with me. Stop trying so hard, Leah. Some things just are not meant to be. The message was clear. I was fighting a losing battle for affection that would never come. By my senior year of high school, I had finally accepted the painful truth that I would never be the daughter they wanted. I channeled my energy into academic success, viewing education as my escape route from a household where I felt like an unwelcome guest rather than a family member. The loneliness was suffocating, but it taught me self-reliance. I learned to celebrate my own victories, comfort myself during disappointments, and find validation from teachers and friends, rather than the people who should have loved me unconditionally. Still, a small part of me held on to hope that someday things might change, that they might finally see my worth. That hope, I would later realize, was both my greatest weakness and my eventual strength. College became my sanctuary, a place where I could finally breathe freely without the constant weight of disappointment and rejection. Ohio State University welcomed me with open arms, and I threw myself into my computer science program with determination born from years of emotional survival. My dormitory felt more like home than the house I had grown up in, and for the first time I was surrounded by people who appreciated my intelligence and dedication. Working at the campus coffee shop 20 hours a week helped cover my living expenses, while my academic scholarship handled tuition. Despite barely scraping by financially, I sent $200 home each month as a gesture of goodwill and responsibility. I told myself this contribution proved I was a valuable family member, though deep down I knew no amount of money would change their opinion of me. Jessica, meanwhile, had chosen Denison University, a private liberal arts college, with annual tuition exceeding $40,000. Richard and Linda happily wrote checks for her expenses without a single complaint, even covering her sorority dues and spring break trips to Cancun. When I mentioned during a rare phone call that I was working extra shifts to afford textbooks, Linda's response was dismissive. "College is supposed to teach you responsibility, Leah. Figure it out." During winter break of my sophomore year, I returned home to find my childhood bedroom converted into a home gym for Jessica. My bed had been replaced with a treadmill, my desk with weight equipment, and my few remaining possessions stuffed into cardboard boxes in the garage. "You have your dorm room anyway," Linda explained when I stood in the doorway stunned. "We needed this space for Jessica's fitness routine. She is trying to lose her freshman 15. The casual cruelty of erasing my existence from their home hit harder than I expected. I had known I was unloved, but seeing my space literally given away to accommodate Jessica's latest whim felt like a final nail in the coffin of any remaining hope. I spent that break sleeping on the living room couch, feeling like a stranger in my own family home. Academic success continued to be my refuge and my revenge. I graduated summa cum laude with a degree in computer science and a minor in mathematics, achieving a 4.0 grade point average that represented 4 years of relentless dedication. The accomplishment should have been a family celebration, but my graduation ceremony conflicted with Jessica's piano recital at her college. The choice, according to Richard, was obvious. "Jessica's recital is a once-in-a-lifetime performance, Leah. You will have other achievements," he told me over the phone. The fact that my graduation was also a once-in-a-lifetime event seemed lost on him entirely. I walked across the stage to receive my diploma with my roommate Sarah's parents cheering from the audience. They had insisted on attending when they learned my family would not be there, and their genuine pride in my accomplishment moved me to tears. When I called home that evening to share the details of the ceremony, Richard answered with distracted enthusiasm. "That is nice, honey. Listen, Jessica's recital was absolutely beautiful. She played Chopin's Nocturne in E-flat major, and there was not a dry eye in the house. You should have heard the applause." The conversation lasted exactly 3 minutes before he handed the phone to Linda, who immediately launched into a detailed description of Jessica's performance dress and the standing ovation she received. Sarah, who witnessed this phone call, looked at me with a mixture of anger and sadness. "Your family is toxic, Leah. You deserve so much better than this treatment." Her words planted a seed of awareness that would eventually bloom into action, though it would take several more years of abuse before I found the courage to completely break free. My first job out of college as a software developer paid $85,000 annually, more money than I had ever imagined earning. Success felt sweet, but the old habits died hard. I continued sending money home monthly, now increasing the amount to $300 as my salary allowed. I also started buying expensive gifts for holidays and birthdays, hoping that generosity might finally crack their emotional armor. Christmas of my 25th year marked the beginning of the end of my relationship with my biological family. I had saved for months to buy thoughtful, expensive presents for everyone. Richard received a high-end golf bag he had mentioned wanting. Linda got the designer handbag she had been eyeing at the department store, and Jessica received the latest MacBook Pro for her photography hobby. My gifts were opened with polite thanks, but no genuine enthusiasm, like obligatory gestures rather than expressions of love. After the gift exchange, Richard and Linda requested a private conversation with me in the kitchen. They explained that Jessica, now 22, and having dropped out of college in her senior year, needed help getting established as an adult. They had found the perfect starter home for her in a trendy neighborhood, but the down payment required $30,000 they did not currently have available. "We know you have been doing well financially, Leah, and family should help family," Richard said, with the confidence of someone who had never questioned his right to make demands. "This would be an investment in Jessica's future, and of course, we would pay you back eventually." The audacity of their request struck me speechless for several seconds. After years of treating me like an unwanted burden, they now expected me to bankroll Jessica's lifestyle. When I declined explaining that I was saving for my own future home purchase, Linda's mask of politeness slipped completely. "After everything we have done for you, this is how you repay us," she demanded, her voice rising with indignation. "We fed you, clothed, you put a roof over your head for 18 years. Do you think that was free? What exactly have you done for me?" The words escaped before I could stop them, years of suppressed frustration finally finding voice. "You provided the legal minimum required by law. You never supported my dreams, never celebrated my successes, never made me feel wanted or loved. Everything I have achieved I accomplished, despite you, not because of you." The argument escalated quickly from there. Richard began listing every penny they had ever spent on my behalf, calculating the cost of my childhood like an accountant reviewing business expenses. Food, shelter, clothing, school supplies. Do you have any idea how much raising a child costs? You owe this family, Leah, whether you want to admit it or not. Jessica, drawn by the raised voices, entered the kitchen with her usual perfect timing to make everything worse. "God, Leah, you are so selfish. You have always been jealous of me, and now you cannot even help your own sister when she needs it. No wonder Mom and Dad never liked you as much." The brutal honesty of that statement hung in the air like poison gas. Finally, someone had said out loud what we all knew to be true. Linda, rather than correcting Jessica or showing any maternal instinct to protect me, nodded in agreement. "Maybe it is time you found your own family, since you clearly do not appreciate this one," Linda said with cold finality. "Pack your things and leave. We are done enabling your ungrateful attitude." Being kicked out of the house on Christmas night felt surreal, like something that happened in movies rather than real life. I drove to a nearby hotel and sat in the parking lot crying until my eyes burned and my throat ached. 25 years of trying to earn love from people incapable of giving it had finally reached its breaking point. As painful as that night was, it also marked the beginning of my true freedom. The hotel room that Christmas night felt like both an ending and a beginning. I lay awake staring at the ceiling, processing the reality that my family had finally done what I had always secretly feared they would do: officially abandoned me. But as the initial shock wore off, something unexpected happened. Instead of desperation, I felt relief washing over me like a cool breeze on a sweltering summer day. The next morning, I made a decision that would define the rest of my life. I would never again subject myself to their emotional abuse or beg for crumbs of affection from people who saw me as a burden. I changed my phone number, deleted their contact information, and moved to Austin, Texas, where I had received a job offer from a growing tech startup. The 5 years that followed were the most fulfilling of my entire life. Without the constant drain of trying to please unpleasant people, my career flourished beyond my wildest expectations. I advanced from software developer to senior engineer, then to team lead, and finally to senior software architect. My annual salary grew to $140,000, and I had accumulated nearly $200,000 in savings and investments. Austin welcomed me with open arms and introduced me to a chosen family of friends who celebrated my successes and supported me through challenges. My neighbor Marcus, a kind-hearted teacher who loved hiking and terrible puns, became my boyfriend and eventual life partner. He could not understand how anyone could treat me the way my biological family had, and his genuine love helped heal wounds I had carried for decades. I started therapy with Dr. Angela Morrison, a skilled counselor who specialized in family trauma and emotional abuse. Through our sessions, I learned to recognize the manipulation tactics my parents had used and developed healthy boundaries that protected my mental health. You cannot control their behavior, Leah, but you can control your response to it. She reminded me during particularly difficult sessions when guilt would threaten to pull me back toward toxic patterns. My chosen family consisted of Marcus, my work colleagues, who became close friends, my therapy group members, who understood the journey of healing from family trauma, and neighbors who treated me with more kindness than my blood relatives ever had. We celebrated holidays together, supported each other through job changes and relationship challenges, and created traditions based on mutual respect and genuine affection, rather than obligation and manipulation. The peace I found in Austin made my previous life feel like a nightmare I had finally awakened from. I bought a beautiful 2-bedroom condo with a view of Lady Bird Lake, adopted a rescue dog named Pixel, who showered me with unconditional love, and began volunteering with organizations that supported children in foster care. Helping young people who had experienced family rejection gave my own painful experiences purpose and meaning. 5 years passed without a single word from Richard, Linda, or Jessica. I occasionally wondered how they were doing, but never felt tempted to reach out. My life had become too rich and fulfilling to risk contaminating it with their toxicity. I was finally free from the exhausting cycle of hope and disappointment that had defined my first 25 years. Then came the phone call that shattered my peaceful existence and forced me to confront my past one final time. Attorney David Thompson called on a Tuesday morning in March, his serious tone immediately putting me on high alert. Ms. Thompson, I am calling to inform you that your parents Richard and Linda Thompson have filed a civil lawsuit against you seeking monetary damages in the amount of $180,000. The absurdity of the claim left me speechless. After 5 years of complete silence, they were now demanding money from me. Attorney Thompson continued reading from the lawsuit, explaining that my parents claimed I owed them for the cost of raising feeding housing and educating their eldest daughter from birth to age 18, plus accumulated interest and inflation adjustments. They have calculated 18 years of expenses, including food, clothing, housing, medical care, school supplies, and transportation, then added 7% annual interest compounded over the years since you reached adulthood. He explained, his voice betraying his own disbelief at the ridiculous nature of their claim. They are represented by attorney Brian Mitchell of Mitchell and Associates. I hired attorney Carmen Rodriguez, a fierce advocate for family abuse survivors, who had built her reputation defending clients against manipulative relatives seeking financial gain. During our first meeting, she reviewed the lawsuit documents with a mixture of professional anger and personal disgust. "Leah, in 20 years of practicing family law, I have never seen anything quite this appalling," she said, shaking her head as she read their itemized list of claimed expenses. "They are literally trying to bill you for the legal obligation they had as parents to provide basic necessities. This is not just morally reprehensible, it is legally groundless." The discovery process revealed information that made their lawsuit even more disgusting. Jessica had accumulated significant debt through poor financial decisions and failed business ventures. Richard and Linda had refinanced their house twice to cover her expenses and were now facing foreclosure. The lawsuit against me was their desperate attempt to solve their financial problems by exploiting the daughter they had spent decades rejecting and abusing. Carmen gathered evidence of their preferential treatment toward Jessica and emotional abuse toward me. We collected old emails where Linda had written cruel comments testimony from teachers who remembered the disparity in parental involvement, and financial records showing the thousands of dollars they had spent on Jessica's education and activities, while forcing me to work part-time jobs to cover my basic needs. My former neighbor, Mrs. Patterson, now in her 70s, provided a particularly damaging witness statement, recounting years of observing their different treatment of their daughters. "I watched that poor girl Leah shovel their driveway and mow their lawn every week while Jessica sat inside playing piano. When Leah won that science fair competition, they never even put the trophy on display. But Jessica's participation ribbons from soccer were framed and hung in the living room like Olympic medals." The most devastating piece of evidence came from Linda's own email account, which Jessica had carelessly left logged in on a shared computer. Carmen found dozens of messages Linda had sent to her friends and sister over the years, complaining about me and expressing sentiments that would horrify any reasonable person. Leah has always been difficult and ungrateful. Sometimes I wonder what our lives would have been like if we had only had Jessica read one email from my 16th birthday. Another sent after my college graduation stated, "Leah thinks she is so smart with her fancy degree, but she was never wanted anyway. Jessica is our real blessing." As the court date approached, I felt a mixture of anxiety and anticipation. Part of me dreaded seeing my parents again after 5 years of peace, but another part looked forward to finally having their behavior evaluated by an objective third party. For the first time in my life, people with authority would hear the truth about how they had treated me. The courthouse buzzed with the usual mixture of tension and anticipation that accompanies civil litigation. I arrived early with Carmen, my hands trembling slightly, despite my determination to remain composed. This moment represented more than a legal proceeding. It was a final reckoning with people who had spent my entire childhood convincing me I was worthless and unwanted. Richard, Linda, and Jessica entered the courtroom together, dressed in their finest clothing, as if appearing respectable could somehow validate their outrageous claims. They looked confident, almost smug, clearly believing their lawsuit would succeed based on some twisted logic that children owe their parents reimbursement for basic parental obligations. Judge Patricia Williams, a stern woman in her 50s, with silver hair and sharp eyes, called the case to order. Attorney Brian Mitchell, representing my parents, stood to present their case with theatrical flair that immediately annoyed me. He painted a picture of ungrateful children abandoning devoted parents who had sacrificed everything for their family. Your Honor, the defendants provided 18 years of care, nutrition, shelter, education, and support for their daughter, spending an estimated $180,000 in the process. Mitchell argued with dramatic gestures. They ask only for reasonable compensation for their investment in raising a child who has since become financially successful and completely cut off contact with her loving family. The word loving, in reference to my parents, made my stomach turn, but I remained silent as Carmen had instructed. Our strategy focused on letting them reveal their true character through their own words and actions, rather than emotional outbursts that might undermine our credibility. Judge Williams listened with professional neutrality as Mitchell presented their itemized list of claimed expenses. Baby formula diapers, clothing, food, medical checkups, school supplies, transportation costs, and even an allocation for utilities and housing expenses had been calculated with accountant precision. The audacity of billing me for sharing electricity and water as a child struck me as both cruel and absurd. Carmen rose to present our defense with quiet confidence that radiated competence and moral authority. She had organized our evidence chronologically, building a timeline of preferential treatment and emotional abuse that painted a devastating picture of my childhood experience. Your Honor, this lawsuit represents not legitimate debt collection, but rather continued abuse of a daughter who was treated as an unwanted burden throughout her childhood, while her younger sister received every advantage and privilege. Carmen began, her voice clear and strong. The evidence will show systematic favoritism, emotional neglect, and psychological abuse that no child should endure from the people meant to protect and nurture them. The first witness Carmen called was Mrs. Patterson, my elderly former neighbor, whose testimony provided an outside perspective on my family dynamics. Despite her age, her memory remained sharp, and her words carried the weight of decades of observation. I lived next door to the Thompson family for 15 years and watched both girls grow up. Mrs. Patterson testified, her voice steady and clear. The difference in how they treated those children was shocking. Leah was always working, always trying to help, always being ignored or criticized. Jessica was treated like a little princess who could do no wrong. It broke my heart to watch. Carmen asked Mrs. Patterson to describe specific examples she had witnessed. The elderly woman recounted Christmas mornings where she could see through their window that Jessica's pile of gifts towered over Leah's modest collection. She described watching me shovel snow and mow grass while Jessica lounged inside, and remembered my parents missing my high school graduation while attending Jessica's much less significant events. When Leah won that big science competition, I was so proud of her. I went over to congratulate the family, and they barely acknowledged it. But when Jessica got a participation trophy from soccer, they acted like she had won the World Cup, Mrs. Patterson said, shaking her head with obvious disapproval. Next, Carmen presented several emails and text messages Linda had sent over the years, including the particularly damaging correspondence found on Jessica's shared computer. Judge Williams's expression grew increasingly stern as Carmen read Linda's own words, describing me as unwanted and difficult, while praising Jessica as their real blessing. This email sent on the plaintiff's 16th birthday states, and I quote, "Leah has always been difficult and ungrateful. Sometimes I wonder what our lives would have been like if we had only had Jessica." Carmen read aloud. This is not the language of a loving parent seeking fair compensation. This is the language of someone who views their child as a regretful mistake. The most powerful moment came when Carmen played a recorded voicemail Linda had left on my old phone number 2 years after I moved to Austin. I had forgotten about the message until Carmen's investigation team recovered it from my archived files. Linda's voice filled the courtroom with venom that made several people visibly uncomfortable. Leah, this is your mother, though I do not know why I bother calling myself that since you obviously do not care about family. Jessica told me you are doing well in your fancy job, and I hope you are happy knowing your sister is struggling while you live selfishly. You always were ungrateful for everything we did for you. Do not bother calling back unless you are ready to help your real family. Judge Williams's professional composure cracked slightly as she listened to the contempt dripping from Linda's words. The voicemail contained no maternal love or concern for my well-being, only anger that I was not available to solve Jessica's problems with my financial success. Carmen concluded our defense by presenting financial evidence showing the hundreds of thousands of dollars Richard and Linda had spent on Jessica's education activities and lifestyle, while forcing me to work part-time jobs as a teenager to cover my basic needs. Bank records, credit card statements, and canceled checks painted a clear picture of deliberate favoritism that contradicted their claims of equal treatment. The evidence shows systematic discrimination against the defendant's own daughter, followed by abandonment when she refused to subsidize their other daughter's irresponsible lifestyle. Carmen summarized. This lawsuit is not about recovering legitimate expenses, but about continuing a pattern of abuse that has defined this family for decades. When Judge Williams asked if my parents wanted to make a final statement, Richard stood up with the same arrogant confidence he had always displayed when asserting his authority over me. His words intended to justify their behavior, instead, sealed their fate. Your Honor, we did our legal duty as parents, and now Leah owes us for that investment. If she had been a better daughter, maybe we would not need to be here today. Some children just never appreciate what they are given, he said with the casual cruelty that had defined my childhood. Judge Williams's response came swift and decisive, her voice carrying the moral authority of someone who had seen too many cases of family abuse disguised as legitimate grievances. This is one of the most appalling cases of parental abuse and manipulation I have witnessed in my years on the bench. Judge Williams declared, her words cutting through the courtroom like a blade. Parents have a legal and moral obligation to provide for their minor children. The idea that they can bill those children for basic necessities as adults is not only legally groundless, but morally reprehensible. She continued with growing intensity, directing her comments toward Richard and Linda, who had begun to look significantly less confident as the reality of their situation became clear. The evidence presented shows systematic favoritism, emotional abuse, and financial discrimination that no child should endure. To then attempt to profit from that abuse through frivolous litigation demonstrates a level of callousness that this court finds deeply disturbing. Judge Williams dismissed their lawsuit entirely and ordered them to pay my attorney fees, which totaled nearly $15,000. She also issued a restraining order prohibiting them from contacting me or filing any additional legal actions related to their parenting expenses. If you attempt to contact the defendant or pursue any similar legal action in the future, you will face contempt of court charges and potential criminal harassment penalties. She warned as Richard, Linda, and Jessica sat in stunned silence. The three of them left the courtroom looking like they had been hit by a truck. Their confident smirks had been replaced by expressions of shock and humiliation as the reality of their public defeat sank in. For the first time in my life, authority figures had seen through their manipulation and held them accountable for their behavior. Outside the courthouse, Carmen congratulated me on our victory, but the real triumph was not legal or financial. It was the validation that my childhood experiences had been real, that their treatment of me was indeed abusive, and that I had been right to protect myself by cutting off contact. The months following the trial brought a peace I had never experienced before. The court's validation freed me from the last traces of guilt and self-doubt that had lingered despite years of therapy and personal growth. I no longer questioned whether I had been too sensitive or ungrateful. Official recognition of their abuse confirmed what I had always known, but had been afraid to fully believe. Marcus and I began planning our wedding surrounded by friends who had become my true family. We decided to use a portion of my savings to establish a scholarship fund for students aging out of foster care, turning my painful experiences into something that could help others navigate similar challenges. I also increased my volunteer work with organizations supporting children from abusive families. Sharing my story with young people who faced similar rejection and manipulation became a source of healing and purpose. Many of them needed to hear that family is not just about blood relatives, but about people who choose to love and support you unconditionally. Dr. Morrison and I celebrated the progress I had made in therapy, but she reminded me that healing is an ongoing process rather than a destination. You have broken a generational cycle of abuse, Leah. That takes tremendous courage and strength. The family you are building now will be based on love and respect, rather than obligation and manipulation. The final lesson came not from victory in court, but from the realization that my worth had never been determined by their love or approval. I had spent decades trying to earn something that was never available, fighting for recognition from people who were emotionally incapable of providing it. Freedom came from accepting that their limitations reflected their character, not my value. I learned that sometimes the greatest gift you can give yourself is walking away from people who cannot see your worth. You do not owe anyone your peace for the sake of maintaining relationships that drain your spirit and diminish your self-respect. Family should be a source of support and love, not a burden you carry out of obligation. Today, I wake up every morning in a home filled with love, surrounded by people who celebrate my successes and support me through challenges. My chosen family consists of individuals who earned their place in my life through kindness, respect, and genuine affection rather than biological accident or social expectation. The lawsuit my parents filed seeking compensation for basic parental obligations now serves as a reminder of how far I have come rather than a source of pain or regret. Their attempt to profit from my success only highlighted the profound difference between their transactional view of relationships and my understanding of authentic love. I learned that my worth was never determined by their love, but by my own recognition of who I truly am. The little girl who once desperately sought approval from people incapable of giving it has grown into a woman who creates her own validation and builds relationships based on mutual respect rather than desperate need. The greatest revenge against those who tried to diminish me was not legal victory or financial success, but the simple act of building a life filled with genuine happiness and surrounded by people who value my existence. That more than any court judgment proved that their assessment of my worth had been wrong all along. Have you ever had to cut toxic family members out of your life for your own mental health? I would love to hear your stories in the comments below about how you found the strength to prioritize your well-being over family expectations. Please like this video if my story resonated with you. Subscribe for more content about overcoming family trauma and building healthy relationships, and share this with anyone who might need to hear that they deserve better treatment than they are currently receiving. Thank you for listening to my journey. And remember that your chosen family can provide more love and support than blood relatives who refuse to value your worth. I wish you all the courage to surround yourselves with people who celebrate rather than diminish your light.